good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are hearing us from. We're glad to be back. This would be the second episode on the second season of the EAM Experts podcast. Today with us, we have Summer Carter. She is the Senior Industry Consultant at Hexagon PPN. Summer, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Ernesto.
So today what we're going to be speaking about is cybersecurity, and more specifically how it involves with operational technologies and different things that are very related to the asset management side of things, right? So Summer, we can get right to it. So we've heard a lot about, IT versus OT. What is that OT side and how is it related, or how is it different from the IT side?
Yes, awesome. Great question, Ernesto. And I think that's actually a really good question to go ahead and kick things off. But before I do that, I guess I would like to just kind of provide a bigger picture when it comes to really understanding the differences between the two. And so that begins with really taking a deep dive and understanding the roles and the different responsibilities that are within an organization and those technologies. And I believe that is actually a great way to explain that by using what's known as the Purdue reference model. So very quick background on the Purdue reference model. The Purdue reference model for industrial control systems, also known as ICS, that was first established in the early 90s by a group of members at Purdue University, hence the name Purdue reference model. And, this reference model has been widely accepted and adopted, and it's used mainly as a concept to really, model networks and segments within control system environments. And so within that reference model that we're referring to, it shows the different interconnections and different interdependencies of all the different components that are typical within a control system. So really looking at that model, this architecture is broken down into really two main categories, beginning with information technology, also known as IT, and then operational technology, also known as OT. So within those
coexist, right?
Yeah, they coexist, exactly.
Perfect.
And within those two categories, there's actually 6 levels of networks starting down at level 0. So I'm actually going to just quickly, very high level, walk through those categories and really kind of understand, what the differences are. So starting at level 5, we have what we call the traditional IT network. And within this IT network, this is where we're typically going to see your corporate business enterprise systems with applications that are spanning across, multiple facilities and multiple plants, right? And so now we're moving down to what we call level 4. And this is going to be inclusive of, your business planning and logistics networks. And within this network, within this layer, we have systems that also support IT networks for various business users at local sites, and then, the connectivity to enterprise wide area networks. Okay. And so now we're coming a little bit further down this model, and we're getting to, we've already established levels 4 and 5. So that's going to be your main traditional IT layer, what we know as.
So when you say IT, you mean things like emails, ERPs, softwares that are, all across the company, and then it goes down to the operational side. Is that where we're looking at?
Exactly. And those different products and processes are going to support, different business functions and facilities across a network.
So an EAM software would probably fall within the IT side, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. That's a great point.
Okay.
Great. And so now to really address your question, Ernesto, now let's go ahead and get into OT. And when we're looking at OT, that layer is actually going to span levels 3 down to level 0. And so if we're going to, continue going down this model, let's, look at level 3. So within level 3, these are going to be the systems that support plant-wide control and different monitoring functions. And if you're not familiar with, some different components, some typical components that we would really see at this level are going to be things like your data historian. So I'm actually formerly from a company called Aspen Technology, and Aspect Technology is known for their data historians. So when you hear products like IP21, Honeywell has their version of a historian, also known as PhD. So those are going to be examples of some components that are going to reside at that level.
Perfect.
And so then trickling down, we're getting into level 2. And then at this level, this is what we have, or we have different supervisory controls. And the main function at this level is it's actually going to be really similar to level 3, but instead of targeting just instead of targeting the entire plant like level 3, level 2 is really going to focus on smaller subsets of the plant, like production areas and unit of operations within an individual plant. And so here at level 2, we're going to have devices that the actual physical operators are using to control different pieces of the process within a plant. So if you ever heard of terms such as a human machine interface, also known as your different HMI screens. So you go to a control room and you see those busy screens that are controlling all the different areas of the plant. So that's an example of a different component that would be within level 2. And then also the different engineering workstations that are there as well. Okay. So now we're getting closer and closer. We're still within this OT level. We're getting down to now what we call is level 1. And within level 1, we're getting into all of the different proprietary systems that are running within these environments that are also doing basic controls. These are going to be controls equipment like DCS systems, safety systems, PLCs, and their main objectives, their main purpose at this level is to send commands to open and close valves, start and stop pumps, and things like that. And so
do these also gather inputs as well?
Exactly. So they're getting logical information on these devices that are essentially controlling different areas of the process. So literally controllers, IO cards, communication modules, processors. These are going to be the things that are doing basic controls within level 1 of the Purdue reference model. And then lastly, we have finally level 0, and this is going to be actually the process itself. We have, all of your different physical components, built devices, like pumps and transmitters and valves, and these are very, very important. These are the things that are essentially sensors to measure speeds on the equipment, temperature, different pressure levels across different equipment in the field. And one thing to note there is that we define operational technology. So to finally answer your question, it's a lot of things. I mean, I've gone through a couple of different levels, talked about a couple of different types of equipment, but it's everything from level 0 being the field instrumentation, level 1 being the basic control systems, and then level 2, where we're getting into kind of the operator interface level, where the operators are actually using equipment to monitor and control different systems. Exactly. Then level 3, those are being devices that are used to share and send information across the plant.
Right, and then you break it back to IT. So if I understand correctly, you have the higher levels that are corporate wise. They control different things, different softwares. It doesn't necessarily have to do anything in any way with the machinery or the operation side of things, and hence the name, I guess. Right. But then you go down to the more granular levels where you have machines, you have those HMIs that you mentioned, you have the controllers, and then the sensors that are directly exposed to the asset per se. So are you seeing this? Could we compare it to something like moving molecules in a physical output? You know, creating moving molecules that will create a physical output based on different commands or anything like this. Are we talking about this
Yeah,
in a way?
certainly. Yeah, that's a really interesting analogy to use, actually. Yeah, so in order for, essentially those molecules or units to really move and interact in a plant, a pump or a valve has to be opened and started.
Right.
And like we talked about with the operator controlling the process through the HMI screens, that operator has to know, they're not just going to do it on their own. They have to know when to actually start or stop that pump that's going to be moving those molecules. So, that operator has to have the right information and knowledge to know, what's the current temperature, what are the parameters, what are the levels, in that device. So all of those things that we talked about essentially have to work together in an ecosystem to create the final products that we consume today in our everyday lives. And essentially that is moving molecules.
Right. So I think at this point, with if we associate it to managing assets, right? If you're managing assets, you're definitely working with operational technology. Now, we have a strong base here. When we talk about OT, um, what's the security perspective to all of this? Why should I, for example, if I'm an asset manager, why should I take this into account at any point?
Exactly. What's the importance? Why does it matter? Why do I need to care about these things?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another great question. And really to answer that, you have to consider the breakdown of the different jobs and responsibilities within an organization and their individual security objectives at those different levels of the Purdue model. So we talked about, IT once again being levels 4 and 5. And historically, from the past, the IT organization's main responsibility is from a security standpoint. And they have very specific objectives that they focus on, key components. And first, starting out with their primary objective being confidentiality, and then followed by integrity and overall availability of the systems. So IT, it primarily involves storage, retrieval, and then transmission of digital transformation or digital information, I'm sorry. And so confidentiality is of a top concern when in regards to the IT space. Mm-hmm. So their goal is to essentially secure everything within those computers, the software running on those computers, applications, their associated hardware, and their related devices. And all of those, are accomplishing some type of business task. So confidentiality is very key when it comes to the IT layer. But however, as we're, moving down that Purdue model, once again, we see things to change. When we look at the OT network, there's some key differences that we have to recognize. And actually right now in the industry, we're starting to see a big transition of those responsibilities I talked about between IT and within OT. And you may have heard this term before. It's a very common, popular buzzword called IT-OT convergence.
All right.
Yeah. And so this convergence in the industry is being highly accelerated from digital transformation. And so from this convergence, we're seeing convergence of responsibilities due to an increasing amount of different cyber attacks and cyber threats within the industry. So, within this transition, we're actually seeing a lot of IT jobs and roles take responsibility for security of systems within OT environments. And so let's really understand, what are the differences in the objectives and the responsibilities in regards to specifically OT. So for an OT environment, their main primary focus is going to be safety and availability of that process equipment. It's of top priority. If you think about it, the equipment that's at the OT environment, they're dealing with physical systems that have to really maintain stable values such as temperatures, pressures, RPM, and it's a very, very
and they have to keep running, right?
Yeah, exactly, and it's very, very meticulous. And when you get out of control or you lack a certain level of control, that leads to dollar signs. It can lead to extensive financial losses because, listen to me, whenever you have any type of shutdown or stop in production, or even resulting in any type of physical harm to either employees, personnel, equipment, that's going to be huge. Let's take into example, like if there's a ransomware attack, and that ransomware attack blocks access to operations, that can lead to a few days of inactivity, and days in a production environment that can seriously lead to, millions and millions of dollars lost easily. So there's a huge focus when it comes to availability, and really getting into some of the technology that's running on those in OT and some of the differences that we see. So typically at the OT network, once again, levels 2 and 3, we're actually seeing a lot of repurposed IT technology running in that environment with things like Windows servers, network gear, workstations. But there's still some significant differences, even though it's similar technology, repurposed technology, there's still some differences in the varying security objectives. I really want to reemphasize that IT is focused on putting prioritization on confidentiality, and OT focusing more on, once again, availability and security. So as a result, when you think of third-party components and applications on these OT devices, it's actually strongly frowned upon because, of there's a lot of unknown risks that might pose a threat to the overall, availability of a certain device. So even though there's similar technologies between your traditional IT devices, they have different objectives and they have different risk tolerances. So any application that really could potentially jeopardize or put any type of OT equipment at risk of the availability, it's strongly not tolerated.
And you have custom developments as well, right? You're not only repurposing other devices from the IT side, but you're also doing your own development. I've seen that day in, day out, right? You have things that are just for them and for one particular machine. So exactly. That's also there.
Yeah, and those custom developments are very sensitive, labor intensive, capital intensive. So yeah, it's a huge risk for certain players in that realm. So when we also get down to, remember, looking at level 0 and level 1, I talked about devices at this level are usually proprietary systems, and those systems are typically purchased at some type of best in breed strategy. So it's resulting in different types of technologies from different vendors, different vendors such as Emerson, Honeywell, Yokogawa, Schneider. You have all these different technologies across all these different vendors. And, those different vendors, they understand the consequences of, having to deal with expensive downtime or having to shut down in order to, upgrade, and, the requirements of having outages. So, like I said, vendors in this space understand that availability is a huge primary objective in the OT space. And so as a result, they've manufactured the equipment to run a very, very long time. I'm talking decades. So I actually came from, before I got into software, I used to work as a process control engineer for a big paper manufacturing company. And that company was around since the 1950s. And a lot of the equipment running in the plant
Old
was
school.
old
Mhm.
school, very antiquated. So now it's very interesting. So now that I'm in software, I really understand the importance of, having up-to-date systems and not having, applications on certain devices that could jeopardize, once again, the availability of the overall equipment.
Awesome. Okay, so now we know why it matters, right? As an asset manager, you have a lot of things to do, and probably cybersecurity is not one of them. But it should, right? Definitely it should. Um, Now, what are some of the steps we can take, to engage in, getting better at OTICS cybersecurity?
Yeah. So how do you make things more secure? What's the process around that? And as you know, as you can tell if it's from our conversation already, it can be very difficult to really secure an OTICS environment. But the big understanding to begin with is, you know, when in regards to cybersecurity, it's really a journey. It's not just going to be a one-stop destination. You're not going to figure it
Mhm,
all out in one project and in one day.
mhm,
Just given the reality of the different types of technologies and vendors, and also there's so many different attacks and risks going on in our world right now. So there's not a one-stop shop, one silver bullet that can really secure your network. So you've really got to have multiple steps and multiple approaches to really secure these different networks. And that concept is a defense in depth strategy. So I like to use a quick analogy for you. Think about protecting your house, the houses you live in, and there's multiple ways that you can actually physically protect your house, right? You
mhm,
can have a fence, a gate code to really keep intruders out, and that would be one defense measure, right? And of course, you can lock your doors, secure your windows. I know a lot of people have those Ring doorbell cameras
Oh yeah.
that alert you whenever there's any type of movement at the door. You want to make sure your
Mhm,
Amazon package has been dropped off.
yeah.
Or you may have a baseball bat by the door in the event that someone does actually break into your house. So that just goes to say that there's multiple ways that you can protect your house. You're not just going to have one mechanism to secure your house. You're not just going to rely on locking your doors. So there's multiple ways, and that applies to that same strategy applies to protecting your OT/ICS networks. You need to have multiple things for that defense strategy. And if one of those things fails, you need to have redundant measures to back up just in case one of those do fail. So, for example, if someone just happens to actually jump your fence, you might have your doors locked. And if someone is able to break through a window, you have your alarm system that goes off and alerts you that there's been a break-in. So really, before you can figure out the process of attacking a cybersecurity, uh, it's important to really map out your journey.
Mm. So going back to that analogy, right? You're probably when you have your whole system, security system in place, when we're exposing thieves, we learn that there's all these sorts of new strategies. So you definitely are in that constant path. Maybe you want to have your community have their communication systems that everyone knows. For example, you mentioned Ring. That's an example that they have their own community guards and anything like that. So it keeps evolving. I think that it does makes a lot of sense to treat it as a journey and not necessarily as a one-stop shop. So what can you tell us about, mapping that journey? You mentioned that just now.
Yeah, when it comes to great question, when it comes to mapping out the journey and laying it out, it's multi-purpose. You have to understand the different layers of improvement, and those different layers, they deal with people, and those people who are managing those technologies and those processes within those layers of improvement, and understanding how that technology and best practices are implemented, and where you can get benefits out of that specific technology. So you really need to look at all of these components when you're mapping out your journey as a holistic way to really accomplish your goal.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to OT ICS security, the ultimate goal is reducing risk to an acceptable level. And you talked about, how do I actually physically map out this journey? Well, you really first have to defining, what does good look like for you in your industry, in your nature. And that's going to be very specific to the environment that you're working in, the workplace, the industry, what you're producing. And risk is not a one size fits all concept. You have to look inward and observe your own risk tolerance. I'm sure, Ernesto, you've heard the phrase, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Definitely.
And also not keeping all your money in one bank. I'm actually learning this for myself. So yeah, just how it's, important to really diversify your assets to account for risk. That same exact approach applies to mapping out your cybersecurity journey. So when you're looking at, what good looks like for me, you want to look at policies, procedures and standards, asset inventory management, network security, and also endpoint protection. So there's a whole host of things you can do to really create that defense in depth strategy.
Okay. When you talk about different policies and all that, I think it makes sense, right, to understand what other people in the industry are doing as well, other people with similar assets or anything like that. And from what I'm gathering, you're essentially covering all your bases, not to 100%. I think that wouldn't be, economically possible. But I do think you're saying cover all your bases as much as you can. An example here in Puerto Rico, we have, a lot of hurricanes, right? And these come every year. They may or may not come this year, but you always have to be ready. And things like, covering your windows, making sure your car is in a safe area. If you're in a zone that can be flooded, then that definitely move out of there. So you can take different precautions for different considerations. And I think, if I'm seeing it correctly, this is something that it has to be taken into account when you're talking about OT and ICS, right?
Exactly. And you made a really good point earlier about just the evolution of protection at different levels. Like, back in the day, we could have gotten by with, just locking your door at night. But now things are more complex. There's all different types of technologies. So you have to have a multi-step approach, a very diverse defense in-depth approach to really address these different areas of security. And that also deals with really understanding, what's my risk profile? Where do I want to be? And what measures do I need to put in place to once again get risk down to an acceptable level? So I need to really have a good idea of, where I am today, setting that baseline from an ICS cybersecurity standpoint. And I know we've talked about the different controls and activities, but there's multiple activities that can really help you achieve that. And very specifically, you can do a maturity assessment to understand what I have in place today in regards to security. You can do a gap assessment to understand where I am, not only where I am today, but where I need to be. So filling those gaps, and just also doing reviews of your different policy standards and plans, conducting vulnerability assessments. Every day there are thousands of vulnerabilities that are being published and released in the environment. So you really have to understand, do my machines have these vulnerabilities across my assets, and what do I need to do to make them secure? And in the event that actually, when the event, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. In the event you have some type of attack on your system, how am I going to respond from, once again, a processes and people and technology standpoint to essentially close that gap and actually respond to that threat?
Yeah, so it's not only be ready, but be also ready to fall on back and get back up. So
yeah, absolutely. You have to have that that defense mindset in place to really be prepared in those events.
all right, there you have it, guys. So this has been a lot of information, and I think it's very powerful because typically we think about IT, having cybersecurity for the IT side, but OT sometimes it's kind of left on defenses and every person for themselves, right? But there's hope. I guess
Yes.
that's the end conversation, right? There is hope
Yes,
and there's a process, and you guys know how to do it best, right?
absolutely. And these conversations like this are very important to really engage and really get the conversations going on these important topics.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of horror stories, but I don't think this type of conversation towards what can be done, taking the necessary steps to get there, and obviously understanding that it's not a one-stop shop and that you're not going to get to 100% unless you have unlimited budgets and unlimited resources. Then you'll have to take a long, hard look at yourself and understand what can you manage and what you need to be prepared to have to face at any point. So any other comments that you would like to add, Summer?
No, I think this conversation has been excellent. Just like you said, it's a journey, it's a process. It involves multiple activities and really understanding where you are currently, and we really emphasize that having a huge importance on understanding your and having a detailed picture of your asset inventory, because you can't protect what you don't know is there. So you have to
Exactly.
really you have to really understand the different levels. So we've gone through all the different levels of the Purdue model, but I know for sure within Hexagon, we really emphasize having access and visibility to those lower levels within the Purdue model. So when you have that visibility, then you can really start prioritizing and securing your networks and having more visibility to really address those unknown vulnerabilities. And it takes a diverse strategy to accomplish those things.
Yep, exactly. And to your point earlier, this is not one project. This is it keeps going. So you have to be ready for that marathon and not the 100 yards.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to take the right steps, break it apart, document them, and really put a plan together to achieve that goal.
Definitely a learning experience.
Great.
All right. So for people who are interested in reaching out to you guys, where can they find you, find more information?
Yeah, we're very active on our LinkedIn page. right on Hexagon PPM. We have a public website. So yeah, there's definitely multiple ways to reach out and getting more information about our company.
Okay. From our side, that would be all. Keep in mind that you can find this and other chapters in our LinkedIn, our Twitter, and also on our visualk.com blog. And this video and others will also be available at YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Anchor FM. So you can definitely reach out and hear from this and many other chapters that we have. So thank you very much. Summer, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ernesto. It's been a pleasure. Love talking with you today.
Perfect. Thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully this happens again soon.
Looking forward to it. Likewise.
Thank you.